So we have one more thing before lunch, and that's Eddie Hartman, who is hopefully in the room somewhere. Eddie, of course, is a longtime friend and member of the Codex community and co-founder of LegalZoom, one of the biggest brands in consumer-facing legal tech. And Eddie will tell us how to give away $6 billion. We wished we had given away $6 billion to winners of the Codex Prize, but Eddie's going to talk about something else. All right, so over to you. All right, so over to Eddie.
Thank you. And Roland and Michael, thank you for having me here. This is my son, Darrow, who's going to be a big part of the presentation. To advance, do we use the... Is there a clicker? Thanks so much. But can we get another round of applause for the Codex winner? That was amazing. That was legitimately history and amazing. Hopefully what I'm going to talk about is future-looking practical impact that our community, I think, can press forward on. So I'm going to talk about how to give away $6 billion. What do I mean? This is a picture. You might look at this picture and assume that you're looking at a protester. You are looking at a protester. You're also looking at a congresswoman, that is Representative Cori Bush, who was homeless for part of her life, protesting the lack of political will to continue supporting the eviction defenses in June of last year, June of 2021. We all knew that there was going to be a wave of evictions as these defenses failed and were not renewed. We also all knew that the segment of the population that faces housing insecurity intersects closely with the sectors that are hit hardest by COVID, things like retail, right, and restaurants and so forth, food service. So we knew that there was going to be a big issue. And when I first tried to get involved, I thought, everything looks like a nail when you're a hammer. I thought I could simply LegalZoom my way through this, right? I thought we could do sort of a LegalZoom version of eviction defense. But then we did some research, and if you know the research, you know that this is not an effective approach. So this is possibly the largest study done of what happens when you get good legal counsel in the hands of people facing eviction, actually at the unlawful detainer state, they're actually in a proceeding. And what we see is that most people do not want to move out of their home when they begin the eviction proceeding. They're hoping to win, of course, and they're hoping to stay. But they don't get to stay. 2/3 of the people here and 3/4 in the full Sergeant Shriver study wind up having to leave as part of winning. If they lose, of course, they're out on the street. But if they win, 3/4 of the time, they have to go. Where do they go? Well, only 1/4 of these people wind up in a rental situation. The other options are, sadly, homelessness at something like 10 to 15%. Moving into a hotel, which is only a temporary solution, or the number one choice, moving in with family. What's the problem there? Family situations then become overcrowded. That then is a violation of the occupancy, and the family gets evicted. We call that a chain reaction. Family snowballs into family, and you wind up with a lot of people scrambling and looking for a place to live. So the answer was clearly not in the courts. The answer was instead rent relief. And the good news is that California had $7.2 billion of rent relief allocated by the federal government. Unfortunately, it wasn't going anywhere. 6 months into the program, the amount of rent relief that was distributed was in the low millions, nowhere near the billions that had been allocated, right? So at this point, I was lucky enough to get involved in the situation, and this is probably the most fun that I had. I got to assemble my team of superheroes, amazing people like Margaret Hagan, who's here with us today, who worked with me on communications, Scott McDonald on mass media, Vanessa Butnick-Davis, who's at Latera on legal engineering, the inimitable Bill Palin on court engineering, Jim Sandman, who of course ran LSC for a long time, on how to work with legal aid lawyers and how to make that dollar stretch further, Sasha, who some of you know is an amazing community organizer, and the deputy director for the California Housing Agency. I'm going to put a halo on her head because she's amazing. This is Lynn Von Koch-Liebert. I have to say, if anybody else is looking at this and is wondering, am I concerned about the whiteness of this group? I am. We had to move quickly, and frankly, a lot of things had to get done in a hurry, but this was an issue, I think. However, the approach that we took began by doing as much as we could to understand the community. So whereas the initial work was put in place very rapidly, of course it was. They knew they were facing a crisis. They jumped in there. When we actually did the interviews, and we did dozens of interviews, we talked to clergy, food bank representatives, people who are in the community, and of course people who are at risk of homelessness. The thing that we heard loud and clear was just a lack of trust in the system. Total lack of trust. Why aren't people applying for rent relief? Well, they don't know if they're going to get any rent relief. They do know that they're concerned about revealing their immigration status, many people, right? So lack of trust was the first thing. Second thing was totally fragmented approach. The state had the $7.2 billion to distribute, but most of the large metros like San Francisco and LA wanted to have their own system for applicants. So did Alameda County. So we had these three tiers, the state system, people who wanted to go their own way, and people wanted a hybrid. They would take some of it and do some of it themselves. Totally fragmented. Channel mismatch was the next big insight. The initial system had been built, and I'm sure some of you have seen this sort of thing before, for a laptop or a desktop. But people who are at risk of homelessness often don't have that. You know what they have? They have a cell phone. They have a cell phone, and they're used to using the cell phone for things like applying for food stamps and applying for other benefits. And finally, the technology was radically suboptimal. And Darrow, did you want to say a word about that?
Yeah, so we ran some tests on the systems that were put in place by the government, by the state of California, and most of the people here were fortunate to have a strong Wi-Fi connection, but a lot of the people in this situation, they oftentimes don't, and it was slow on my computer personally. It would be even slower, and perhaps people wouldn't even stay on that page if they didn't have a strong Wi-Fi connection. So that was the first main issue in terms of technology. And then once you got to that page, it was okay. The UI had some major issues. So firstly, if you wanted to, you have one main page that essentially breaks off into, depending on what county you're in, what system you should go through. So like we said earlier, they had the fragmented approach meant that you went through different application processes, whether you were in, for example, Los Angeles or in San Fernando Valley or wherever. And so you had to first identify your location. That was one main page. And it was very difficult to get from that page to those other applications. So I would estimate that 3 out of 4 people would not be able to get from that first page to those other pages, just based on how it was set up and how difficult it would be to use on mobile.
Thank you. So what did we do? Well, Darrow and Bill Palin tore apart the technology and looked for improvements. Margaret and I worked on the language. And to give you an idea, and again, they rushed to get it done, and I understand why, but the form asked what language do you speak on page 9, right? There was a lot to correct, and we knew that it was going to have to fit a mobile form factor, so we pared back that language every chance that we could. Every time there was a legal term, we took it out. And most importantly, we made it absolutely clear that your immigration status would not be asked or recorded. We also worked with the government to do things like put in place on the eviction forms that if the person being evicted, the tenant, was in the process of applying for rent relief, that the eviction proceeding could not move forward. So a lot of work was done. Meanwhile, Scott McDonald was working on communication with people at the state agency. And I have to say, the negative headlines. Oh, I'm sorry, Jared, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I did. So in terms of what we focused on, one main thing we worked on was, I worked on with Bill Palin, was we created the system called the Quick Check system. The Quick Check system, if you were somebody in the situation, you may be close to facing eviction, you wouldn't know if the system worked in the first place and how much money you would get out of it at the end. So we applied this entrepreneurial mindset to that, where we thought, okay, you need to tell the person upfront how much they're going to get. So they would answer 2 or 3 quick questions, and then they would be immediately told how much money you could get based on your situation. And so it wouldn't be like $100, it would be like a majority or even all of their rent cost.
We kind of borrowed that from Quicken Loans, right? You know, go in there and immediately check, but it was worked. It was very effective. So by September, there were headlines all across the country saying rent relief is not working. Look at Texas, look at New York, look at New Jersey, but don't look at California. The work went in May. By June, throughput had quadrupled, and it kept building and building and building from there. And I'm pleased to tell you, today it's the most successful rent relief program in the country. We have distributed over $2.5 billion. More than $6 billion has been approved. These are families that are being helped not to wind up on the street. It's a very significant thing. And I want to let you know something. All of you in this community, heck, if we're smart enough to create an incredible AI program like the one we just heard about, the one that won the prize, my goodness, can't we all contribute a little bit to help people reach the benefits and the rights that they really ought to have? So here's my humble ask, because I know we only have 10 minutes. Darrow and I are now moving on. We actually formed a little nonprofit so that we could work with state government. We are working with California EDD. Today, if you're out of work in California, it may be 6 months before you receive your first unemployment check, because of course the process doesn't really employ technology properly. We are looking for more places to eliminate red tape, connect people with their benefits. If you want to join us in this, I'll call it a crusade. If you want to join us in this effort, we would love to have you. If you know places where we can help, we want to hear about that too. So, Michael was saying earlier, he hopes that some of the $6 billion comes to him. We can't do that quite yet, Michael. But again, we look to all of you to join with us in this effort, and thank you very much.